Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California, who's excited that that new Cardi B song, WAP, came out tonight. Obviously, I have not listened to it. I did read the lyrics. I don't think I'm a prude, but bit much. So, hey everyone, if you've never listened to the show before, I'm the host, and I love irony. Hey, this is a very good episode. This is Jason Williamson. If you don't know who Jason is, let me read you his bio real quick. Originally from Grantham, Lincolnshire, musician Jason Williamson spent several years pursuing music unsuccessfully, both with various groups and as a solo singer-songwriter, and working as a session musician with a number of bands, including Spiritualized. It was when Jason met Andrew Fearn, though, and they formed Sleaford Mods, that things started to take off. Since 2007, they released 10 albums to much acclaim, and their latest, All That Glue, which is a collection of crowd pleasers, B-sides, and rarities, was just released in May on Rough Trade. I think it's a great album. And Jason's publicist wrote me, is like, hey, do you want to talk to Jason? I was like, yeah. And this is, so because of the tumult from the last couple months, a lot of the interviews are a little bit out of order. This one I did kind of early on in Quar, I think back in May. And I called up Jason over Zoom over in England, in Nottingham, and we talked a lot about class, because that's it's one of the big things that he sings about. We talked a lot about class and a lot about how that kind of not preordains your path, but maybe preordains the boundaries, but also how you can slip past those boundaries. Is that the metaphor? Anyway, I thought it was great. Love his music, so I hope you enjoy this one. By the way, if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. If you want to check out more episodes, they should all be up on Spotify, or you can also download all the MP3s at beginnings.libsyn.com. You know, I've done this show for about 10 years. Tons of, hey, you know what? If you mentioned in this episode Wire, I've talked to Colin Newman from Wire. Talked to tons of musicians and actors and writers. Tons of people from the UK. Aisling B, Maeve Higgins, Josie Long, Will Sharp from Flowers, and also the wonderful Giri Haji. So check out those episodes. If you like what you hear, why not subscribe to the show? Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google and Stitcher and all those places. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Andy Beckman. That's about it. Some very cool episodes coming up, including Sam Precott from Sea and Cake, Josh Radner from How I Met Your Mother, Mac McCon of Superchunk, Owen Pallett of Final Fantasy and Arcade Fire. So stay tuned for that. But for now, here's Jason. When I was thinking about talking to you, I was like, I started to like imagine, I'm like, it's weird how Britain and America, we went off separately, but yet somehow like in the 1980s on, our leaders are strikingly similar, and we grew up in strikingly similar kind of political situations, right? You have Reagan and Thatcher, you've got Blair and Bush, you have now Johnson and Trump. Both the establishments destroyed Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders. Yet in England, you guys are a lot more class conscious than we are. I'm curious a little bit about how you became class conscious.
Well, firstly, it's a good point about the pairings of, the partnerships of evil over the last three presidencies. You're completely correct, But yeah, I don't know. I'm just out of just being quite poor, not having many options. My lack of finesse. What else? Just my general standing in the world, And none of this occurred to me to be anything other than a day-to-day life, until about 2014. I started to connect the dots between that and where I'd come from, my background, who I was, my psychological pattern, so to speak, how I looked at the world. And I think all these are obviously connected to my social status, the environment I was born in, and the people that I grew up with, and the landscape that was presented to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As I get older, this obviously becomes more apparent. You obviously have the introduction of the free market and social mobility and neoliberalism, and all of those open their doors to you if you had the ideas. If you had what it took, you could make a lot of money. But that's completely different to being brought up in an extremely privileged environment. You know what I mean? It's like a different world.
Oh yeah, totally.
And why should that be? It's insane when you think about it. Why are they still giving titles like Prince to people and Princess and Queen? What the fuck? It's not a Walt Disney film, It's insane, and it's quite dark, and it's insular, selfish, greedy, and it reeks of paranoia and fear, And so it dawned on me from about 2014 that at the age of fucking 42, they're laughing anyway. Well, what am I going to do to these people just because I've got a little bit of an idea of what they are?
I mean, it took me into my 20s until I finally broke out of this kind of I came from a pretty middle class background. And I was totally not class conscious. I was class conscious in a way that was very bodily, in the sense that when I was around rich people, I would feel shame for not knowing what it was. I was like, oh, they're judging me for not being like them, and I don't know the rules. But I didn't know that consciously. It was just a thing I would feel shame in my body and be like, I'm not using the right fork or whatever fucking thing I'm supposed to be doing around them. But what was it about 2014? Was it just that there was a critical mass of things that had happened to you? Was there a particular incident, or was it just a dawning that happened?
Oh, not really. Yeah, I've read about 2 or 3 paragraphs from Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, it's great.
That's as far as I got before. I was like, this is too fucking heavy. It's going to take me ages to transcribe this, and the fucking thing was printed in English as well, So, and I've read a couple of other books. Owen Jones's Chavs. And it got me thinking, these are all really, really, well, apart from the Marcuse, I would regard Owen Jones's Chavs as, quite a basic introduction to the divisions that class create. But and then that just spiraled really. And then I started just looking around at things around me and it just snowballed. But, I'm still obviously very basic with it in a lot of respects. Philosophically, there's probably a little bit more there, but as regards, pinpointing historical fact, blah blah blah, knowledge about true facts, No, I'm very basic. If I'm not even basic, you know what I mean? But it just so happens that these things kick-started an imagination in me that I just went with, you know what I mean? And I used my knowledge of language to the best of my ability to then dress lyrics that fitted the mold of this situation I was in psychologically, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, did you grow up with any kind of like kernel of not like the way that I grew up with that kind of like bodily feeling whenever I was around like rich people, knowing that like, oh, I don't belong here? Did you grow up with like, was there that kind of like feeling in you, or did you understand it in that kind of inchoate way at all?
Well, I never saw any. I didn't know. I had no experience of really rich people, and still haven't. Even being in a successful band, I've not met that many. I've met a lot of I've met a lot of rich people in London of late, but they are obviously very nice because they're fans of the band, you know. So you don't see the difference so much. But before that, my experience of very rich people was virtually nil. You know, it just wasn't on the agenda. You just didn't really think that you knew people like that existed, but you took that as you had no problem with it. You know, to you they were just English people. You know, like you were, but posh. You know what I mean?
Right.
You didn't really see the true reality of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you're growing up in Grantham, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's like what, the middle of England about?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It's the middle of England, basically. Yeah.
What's it like growing up there? I looked at some pictures online. It looks very beautiful.
It's like an old market town. It's a very old medieval market town. So there's a lot of history there, dating back from as far back as the 12th century, 11th century even. So, it used to be a very prominent place on the old trading route, which was just one road that went up and down England, that people would use. So, but obviously that's changed. It's now in massive deterioration, like a lot of small towns are, because of austerity and government cutbacks. You know what I mean? All the traders left that and gone to massive shopping malls that are near cities. Everything's changed. It's down. It's shrunk basically. You can go to the cinema. You can go and buy a pair of jeans all under one roof these days. So. Towns like Grantham are really suffering because of that, and obviously with food as well. So yeah, but no, it's quite a small little bubble. It was like living in a bubble. You know what I mean? It's like if you step outside of the bubble, it's got its own accent. It's got its own dialect, so to speak, almost. You step out of the bubble and you're a small, insignificant little insect, the big wide world seems very scary in a lot of respects.
When did you find that part out? So you grew up in this bubble. At what point do you step out of it and you're like, oh, right, this is just a small town?
I got about 23, I left at 23 and moved to London. And so I was in London for 2 years. I actually came over to your country for about 8 months. Lived in San Francisco for 8 months. Well, just outside actually, Fremont. Lived in Silicon Valley for a while. I worked as a security guard. That was terrible. And moved back to England about 92. I worked in a factory for another year in Grantham and then moved to London at the age of 23. And went from there to Nottingham, where I've lived currently. So, it had nothing for me after a certain age. 23 was the limit. I mean, it was terrible then, but I would have gone a lot sooner if I hadn't been so wet behind the ears, so to speak.
Do you feel any sense of the history? If you grew up in a small town here in America, it is just like it's strip malls. It is like Walmarts. There's no real sense of history because, America is, just a couple hundred years old in relation to England. So I'm wondering, do you like feel, you said it goes back to like the 1100s, right? Do you feel that historicalness in the air? I mean, I know it's a weird question, but like...
Yeah, you do. And that historical character has taken hold again, with the Brexit vote. It's reawakened that oldie worldy, medieval, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
The peasant mentality. And it makes you realise that the aristocracy have ruled for centuries and have kept ruling. We've managed to still keep hold of the monarchy, which is pointless in every sense of the word. It's still there. So yes, you do feel that. You can feel that. But it's something that I hold no value. I don't value it because since the band has taken off, I've travelled. But even before that, I felt disconnected to this idea of Britishness. I like the music and I like some of the subcultures and the food and the humour, but this idea of being proud of being a part of a country that used to own, half of the world is just fucking stupid, you know what I mean? But it's reawakened that in people, Brexit especially, and the Conservatives have reawakened that. There's almost this renaissance with this old way of being, going back to the early 50s, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's the same thing, kind of thing here, same flavor, in which I was just thinking the other day about just the reaction to the coronavirus here. It's some of the dumbest thinking I've seen in a long time. And I'm like, oh, this is like, we're back, into this magical thinking of like the medieval period. Right? People are going to start putting leeches on and like bloodletting in order to try to like cure this. It's remarkably similar.
I mean, your country is just, there's so, from my experience of it, there's large areas of it that are just so untouched, aren't there? By any kind of modern contemporary thinking. It's quite incredible. And although it's a very young country, as you've said, but there is a deep-seated tradition there, isn't there? That is almost on a par with England's. Well, it is, it's very similar in a lot of respects.
Yeah, I mean, I made a joke that like the reason we're like this is because every other country sent their like dumbest people over here, and then that's how we're founded.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say? I mean, you get a hard time, especially with Trump. People over here, I've got this idea that people that don't get out of the arse generally think Americans are all like Trump. And it's just, it's weird, But it's always been like that. English people still refer to Americans as Yanks. Some of them do, the ones that don't get out of the arse, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's just like, what the fuck are you on about? But since I've been travelling, since the band took off, it just makes you realise that you are not you are not the property of any one country. You're just a human being. It just so happens you're in that part of the country. Fine if you want to feel proud about your accent and your flag, that's fine. But I think essentially it's just stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's really revealed to me about how difficult it is to build like left-leaning progressive structures to help people, because it's just so, you just like have like a psychopath like Trump walk in and just like knock everything down. And it's very easy to knock something down, and it's very difficult to build something up.
Yeah, well, it's interesting with Trump because it happened with a lot of dictators. I mean, the obvious one, obviously Adolf Hitler, but he won an astonishing victory when nobody thought he would. He made an absolute fool of himself for a very long time. People laughed at him. And then for some reason he got his foot through the door, and then business just surrounded him. People surrounded him. He was protected, and you can see that with Trump, to a certain degree. There's a few people around him that are just protecting him, and they'll let him fall when the time comes. But he is serving a purpose at the minute, and it's it's astonishing to watch, really.
Do you ever find it like it's, to me, if it wasn't so murderous to so many people, it would be fascinating, because I'm sitting here watching this all happen. I can do my little bit, to try to help locally here in Los Angeles. But I'm just watching world historical events play out the same way they played out before, and there's not much I can do about it on that level. And it's fascinating. So, I mean, in a kind of just like, if I detach from the moment, it's fascinating to watch. I'm like, oh, this has all happened before. And people in that time, in World War II, people hated Hitler as much as we hate Trump, and they couldn't do it. And they just had to sit there and kind of watch it happen.
Sure. Yeah, it's really, especially it's happening in America. You wouldn't think. I grew up being told America were allies and they were the heroes. It was a magical place. It presented to us as children in England. It's fucking weird. It really is. It's fucked, to be honest. I mean, our Prime Minister is trying his hardest to mimic Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Which is, even saying that is just, because Donald Trump, he's just an idiot. He's not got anything, has he? He's just a vessel.
No, he's almost like an avatar of like narcissism and malice. Like if there was some kind of like god of that in Greek mythology.
You could kind of understand it if he had some kind of vision or some horrible. I mean, it's horrible to say it, but Adolf Hitler, he had this fucking thing in his head. This is what. All right then, Adolf. What's it all about? Well, this is what it's fucking all about, right? And he'd sit there for fucking weeks, giving you some detailed, mad fucking idea about his vision of the world. But Trump, just eats fucking fries, doesn't he? What was that? What was that fucking thing he did the other day where he's like, oh yeah, just inject bleach, and you could see the woman. You could see that woman just sat there looking at him.
It's. Do you know what it was? He saw a sign behind him that talked about like disinfecting things and about sunlight, and he's so stupid that, or just I think ignorance better, that he just saw that, didn't bother reading what it actually said, and then just put the pieces together in his head as he was talking. I worked for a woman. When I moved to New York, I had no money, and I just had to take whatever job I could find. And I just kept going from like terrible job to terrible job. And I worked for a woman that is exactly, I understand his psychology because I worked for a woman that was just like him. I think she had just done, I don't know if she was always like this or if she had done just so much coke that it just like ate her brain away. But she was like, she was just an impulsive creature. She would just react in the moment to whatever was happening. And she didn't understand. She just couldn't understand anything more complicated than like very basic emotions. So if it was anything more than that, she would get frustrated and react with fury. And she would like throw a fit and like rip pages out of a report on her desk or like throw things in her office. And it's because she was just this kind of like raw nerve that was just reacting to everything around her just in the moment without there being any kind of like conscious thought attached to it. And so I'm like, I saw that up close for about a year, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah, sure. No, that's really well explained. No, you're right. It's too much, really.
Yeah, it is. So what was your childhood like when you're growing up in Grantham? I read that your parents got divorced at when you were 10. But what was your life like before that? What did they do for a living?
My dad was a paramedic, and my mum, she was just at home. She had jobs in shops, shoe shops, supermarkets, part-time jobs. That was it. It was like an average 1970s upbringing, I guess. There were issues, obviously. My old man had problems with not being able to control himself. He was always with other women, and so my mother in the end was just like this. I've had enough, So yeah. I think after that, it just got a bit stale, really. I mean, before that, it would, as much as you probably, I would have grown up to think, yeah, you know, my dad, yeah, fine, but he's a bit of a twat. At least, you know, you need that unit as a kid. You need your mum and dad with you. And I think if there's a breakup, then it has to be carefully orchestrated by both parties to not leave the kid feeling, you know, just alone, basically. But that wasn't orchestrated very well. They weren't very good at it. They were only in their early 20s. So it was a fucking shit show. And then after that, it just became very dry and very bland. You know, life from them onwards was just escapism through music, really. You know what I mean? You know, school was shit. You know, you'd moved. You know, my mother met my stepfather, who, you know, I love him to bits. He's brilliant. But you know, it's like you just lived. It was another environment you had to get used to, and you know, sometimes you think it's not so great, is it? You know, you would have probably preferred your parents to stay together, but obviously that didn't work. But yeah, just a regular thing, you know, going through school, it was shit. You know, everything was crap. You started smoking at 13, you know what I mean? You kissed girls badly. And, you know, I didn't drink until I was 14, 15. And then that was not very good. So I didn't do that again until I was 17. That's when it started getting interesting, when I discovered drugs. And you know, just lost myself in drugs, really, and music.
I mean, were those two things connected for you? Drugs and music?
Yeah, a little bit, you know, because I was into clubbing, dance music, house music when that came out, the rave culture started, the club culture started in the late 80s, and, you know, that was massive, and everyone just started taking ecstasy and, you know, staying up all night. It was brilliant, yeah, for a while, and then it got very sour. And in between that period, I then decided to become a musician, you know, full time. That's what I wanted to do.
I mean, when you made that decision, like you made like that an actual clear existential decision. Oh, I want to be a musician.
Yeah, I was trying to do acting for a while. I tried to get into acting school, but that was just too fucking much. It was like, it was expensive to go and audition. And everyone that you were at auditions with, you know, was rich, came from a rich family. If they didn't, or, you know, it was kind of upper middle class onwards, you know what I mean? You didn't get any working class people there. Nobody had an accent. Everyone were just, hello, you know what I mean? Very hello, and were just brilliant at it. They were really, really talented people, and you just think to yourself, fucking hell, you know. I'm never going to get in here. I haven't got the money, you know. And then there was talk of scholarships, but obviously that's a fucking needle in a haystack. It's, you know, you could be waiting around for years to see if you won one. So I went off the idea in the end. And, you know, Paul Weller came out with his album Wildwood, and it got me back into the idea of mod, into the idea of singing. And that's when it changed, you know. A year and a half later, Oasis released Definitely Maybe, and then things just really took off, you know what I mean? So for me, it was really interesting because I'd grown up with mod, and it was, you know, I was a big Jam fan, and, you know, it was my code of conduct, so to speak. And, you know, so I just went with that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, when did you get into, I mean, my knowledge of mod culture is mostly through music, a little bit because of the Mighty Boosh. And, yeah. So, you know, what does it mean for you? Like what, you know, when you started to get into it in, I guess, the early 80s or late 70s?
It was good, you know, everyone was wearing like Fred Perry and looking smart and watching Quadrophenia and like listening to The Who and the Jam and wearing, you know, sort of like stay pressed trousers and bowling shoes. And it was a real thing, you know. It was all we had as kids because, you know, careers lessons at school were a bloke from the army or a bloke from the supermarket, you know. That's the level of scope the school was saying that you were, you know, entitled to as yeah, that's all it was. It was like, this is what you're going to do. And I remember, you know, I got a job as a butcher when I left school in a factory. And I remember going back into school to get something, and my old sports teacher was over the moon. He couldn't believe it that I'd got this job as a butcher. He said, "You're really lucky." You've landed. Like it was a big thing, like I got a job at fucking IBM or something.
I mean, that's nuts, because here it's just implicit. I remember before I went to do comedy, I was a philosophy professor, and I was teaching a critical thinking course in this kind of like small Christian college outside of Philadelphia, and it's mostly the students were like pretty working class or like lower middle class, and we were just talking. I'm middle class. I grew up middle class, and I had to kind of like claw my way here. And we were just talked about like how there are like they never grew up with like any kind of expectations. You know, there's this kind of like weird mythology here, and I think it's used to protect the very wealthy or the ruling class. But like the idea, like, you know, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Anyone can be anything. And we talked about the reality of like, if you want to run for president here, that requires on the low end, you know, tens of millions of dollars. And like, where are you going to get that money if you don't, you know, if you don't have access to that already, right? But it's all implicit here, right? No one, until we talked about that in that class, about like how your future, how your existential or career is kind of structured by the class you're born into a little bit or a lot. None of the students like were thinking about that stuff. But in your school, you had a grocer and someone from the army come and be like, hey, okay, so this is where you were born. Here's your two possibilities.
Sure. Yeah.
So like even from an early age, they kind of like drill it into your head in a very explicit way.
Yeah, they must look at the school as as a whole, as a performance thing, and think, well, where is this school's strengths? And our school's strengths were obviously at the lower end of the scale. You know, it's thinking for yourself that gets you anywhere, and it's inspiration and connecting to something.
Yeah.
But if a lot of my mates who I went to school with, who I talk to, have largely not changed, and that's obviously down to childhood, down to, crisis of whatever they experienced in their families, along with loads of other things. But it's like, for some reason, an arm reached out and I was always looking in magazines on the high street, on a Saturday, and looking at clothes and looking at bands and really looking at people, in other countries and thinking, wow, So something dragged me out of that box, you know what I mean? I could have obviously gone that way, but, I didn't for some reason,
Yeah. I mean, was there something specific, or was it just like your interest in acting that kind of like pushed you to the side?
It was music and acting, getting into the Sex Pistols as a 10-year-old, and what they represented, even as late as 1980, 4 years after they exploded, for people that weren't around then, they were really a lifeline for a lot of alienated kids, you know what I mean? That really stuck with me, this idea that people like that could get somewhere with such horrible music, music that was, really dark as well,
Right.
To the listener in 1976, John Lydon must have seemed horrible, and it made Marilyn Manson look like fucking, I don't know, Pussycat Dolls or something. You know what I mean? It's like totally horrible, but really good. So yeah, that really caused an impression on me. You know what I mean? And I think people either connect with that or don't. And I suppose that's why musicians are around, isn't it? You are born and you just connect with stuff like that. So,
I mean, it was also a time. I grew up in the, I was a teenager in the early 90s, and we're both from a time before the internet where you really had to discover music. You had to really like want to find these things.
Oh God. Yeah, definitely.
I'm a little curious, like also like, what is it, cause you're also you're a teenager around the time like The Fall and Wire, and there's all this kind of like post-punk kind of stuff that I at least I from here see in your music a little bit. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, I was never into it. I mean, I was into the Jam around 1982, just solidly. I was at, 13?
Yeah.
And from 82 onwards, I was obsessed with the Jam and all things mod and Northern Soul, Motown, Atlantic Soul, and everything connected with that. The Who, the Small Faces to a certain degree. Stuff like that, and then I went from that on to stuff like psychobilly, the Meteors, etc. Stuff like that. So no, I never touched on post-punk, and if anything, it was considered a bit brainy, a bit posh. Do you know what I mean? I think all the lads when the Jam lost their shine, all the lads in school would listen to early U2 or Spandau Ballet. Or weird shit like that. No, don't get me wrong, they're all good bands. Early U2 was quite good, the first album. But post-punk, Wire, The Fall, no, they were considered brainy bands. The Smiths, brainy band, no, stay away. It was literally like that. So
okay, if you have this kind of like, if you have like everyone telling you you have to be a butcher or you have to work in like a meat factory or you have to work in a grocery store, something like that. How do you break away from that to be like, no, I want to be an actor?
I just stayed on my own, and I lived with my dad. I left school and lived with my dad and worked in a factory, and I just hung around on my own. Occasionally I'll go out with friends from school into town and drink lager. And it was, your typical 16-year-old drinking lager, getting off with girls, smoking, throwing up. But generally, I would spend time on my own. I think I was quite depressed, to be honest, because the factory job was fucking horrible. And I just felt it was a shock. It was horrible. And I thought, I can't do this. So I reapplied to college. I'd already got into college to do an acting course, but I said, no, I'm going to go and earn money because my dad was adamant I had to pay him rent. Which is fair enough, but, I reapplied to college after a year and got back onto an acting course. And then I went to do my GCSEs and A-levels, which are, kind of entry to get a degree, to apply to universities. But I didn't bother applying. I spent 3 years doing GCSEs and A-levels and that was it. I went back into the world of work and then moved to America, as we talked about earlier.
I mean, what prompted you to move to San Francisco? Just to, see the world?
I had a cousin there, and she lived in Fremont, and she was like, can I come over? I said, and she was like, yeah, come over. And she thought I was coming over for 2 weeks, but I stayed for 6 months, 8 months. I don't think she liked it very much, but I was too young and too naive to even sense that she didn't like it. So I stayed there, got a job as a security guard. Worked there doing nights in Haywood, which was just up the road. And it was pretty weird, to be honest.
Weird, why?
Well, I'd never left Grantham and I hadn't been anywhere really, so then going to fucking San Francisco and working as a security guard, having to knock on apartment doors. I used to patrol an apartment complex in Haywood. If there was a disturbance, and there regularly was, fights, domestic fights, I'd have to go and knock on the door and ask if everything was all right first, and then I'd have to call the cops, which it wasn't great. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff really didn't sit well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. You're like an attaché to the police.
Basically, yeah. So, it was pretty bad.
I mean, so, like, because the thing to me, when I think about acting, I also, two things. One is that it's interesting, how you said, like, most people that are acting in England, I think it's the same thing here in America, although we don't talk about class at all, but like that you come from either an acting family or you come from money, so you have the leisure to pursue acting in some way, you know. Because I watch a lot of British TV, and I noticed that there's not a ton of, like, maybe Joe Brand. I don't know if you watched like Getting On or Damned, like those shows. What's that?
What's that? What was that? Joe Brand?
Yeah, she's written 2 really amazing shows called Getting On and another one called Damned, which is about like a social services office. It's real.
Is she English Joe Brand? You mean?
Yeah.
Oh right, okay. She out in the States now? Then is she? Or?
No, I think she lives in England.
Oh, I've not seen those shows. Right, okay.
They're great, but they're like the only times that I really see any kind of like working class people in.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
But it's not that I'm not actually. I don't see a ton. I don't, not all of my television is British, but enough that where I'm just like, oh, it's not really represented the same way. It's not really represented here, because I think there are all these filters to filter out people who don't come from money in some way. Right. So, I mean, like, did you know about those kinds of things before you wanted to do that? Like, what was I'm really curious about these moments where people like both kind of figure out like what really feels right to them in terms of like careers, or just like, what they want to make of themselves. And I'm curious about like, how did you come to understand the way things were? How did that change how you felt inside about acting?
It didn't really change it. I just accepted the fact that the world wasn't very nice, and it'd taken me 42 years to get a basic idea of why that was to a certain degree. It didn't bother me. It didn't alter my ideas about it. In fact, I've been doing a fair bit of acting since the band took off. The opportunities are now there for me, you know what I mean?
Right.
When I did it back in 1991, it didn't occur to me then that there was a heavy bias. Some people that I audition with I still see occasionally in films, and it blows your head off. You are very happy for them, but at the same time it's quite heartbreaking because you feel as if you are lesser than them still,
Yeah.
Totally. And there is a divide, but it can get completely boring, and it can devour conversations, and you just feel sometimes like you're just repeating the same old shit about class. But it is important, I think, in this country. I think, I think it is in yours, to a certain degree, in any country where there's a big divide,
Yeah. It's just that I just think it's just interesting here. It's just so hidden. It is. No one talks about it. Everyone thinks that there's this kind of like, if you didn't succeed here in America, it's your fucking fault.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's the same in England as well.
Interesting.
It's up to you, You could have got off your arse and done something. But a lot of people don't realise a lot of people can't do anything, There are, people, large swaths of working class people are extremely undereducated and almost like completely different entities. You know what I mean? It's incredible. And it shouldn't be like that, you know what I mean? It just should not be like that. And they are covered, they are buried, they are forgotten about. They're shoved into corners, given menial jobs, and those areas will keep on going and looking after themselves like, insulated worlds, you know what I mean? Full of people forgotten by the rest of contemporary society,
Yeah. Did you grow up in an emotionally aware household? Because I'm trying to think about like both acting and music require some kind of sensitivity to the world.
Yeah, no, I think I had a lot of childhood trauma, so I think a lot of people I meet who are creatives have experienced a lot of trauma, and so they connect to expressing themselves more. I don't know. It's just the idea is there more so than it would be with I'm probably generalising a bit here, but my experience of creative people are generally that they're fucked up in some way. You know what I mean? People that have come from more stable families where it's been balanced, the level of education and parent rearing. Usually with people like that, you feel quite comforted. It's a comfort to be in their company almost, But yeah, I would say that it's like, I don't know, they weren't overly emotional, my parents, no. My father was 23 and my mum was 20. They were babies, you know what I mean? That were bringing up a baby. So it was like, what can you do, No, there wasn't a great philosophical scope with either of them, to be honest.
I mean, was it just the divorce that kind of like unmoored you a bit?
I think so, yeah, there's that. And there's other aspects that went on earlier as a child with my mother. It caused a great deal of upset from around the age of 2. I feel quite uncomfortable talking about it, to be honest. I'm not sure if my mother would agree me talking about it, so I think we'll just swoop that. But yeah, it caused a swelling of pain, of panic, of my mother, she slipped into a massive depression, and I was more or less kind of put on the wayside. So I missed out on a good 2 or 3 years parenthood, as my mother was just out of the picture totally. So that connected to that as well. So, by the time I got to 10, 11, obviously, it was formed within me from about 4 or 5 onwards, So this person that I've turned into today, was a result of that, I would imagine,
Yeah. I mean, that's what I think is interesting in some way, how these things, our childhoods are inescapable in a way, right? And there's some things we can do. Like I wonder if a lot of people, if we go into making music or writing or whatever in some way to deal with these kinds of things, these kinds of traumas in childhood.
I think I put it down to the fact of attention, and wanting attention. So, when I got into the idea of doing the arts, it wasn't because I was passionate about the arts. It was because I wanted attention and I wanted to become famous, That was clear in acting from earlier on, and also with music, I wanted to find things that would elevate me from the normal world, which I found terribly depressing, into this kind of dream world where I could be famous and be rich, have lots of sex, take lots of drugs, and become idolized. And that's what I thought the answer was. But it wasn't to be. I wasn't successful until I was 42, and by then I'd learnt to appreciate creativity and to love it for the things about it that I love.
Yeah. What was that process like for you of coming to it less being, because I know when I was younger, I had these like dream, like I would go running, and in my mind's eye would be, me. I was in a band at the time, so it would be me on stage in front of like people, and I'm like, and it wasn't the like making of something that I treasured. I mean, I liked doing that. It wasn't just that, but also like the external facing parts of it were like what my fantasies were about. What was the process of you of coming to of getting over that part of it, or not necessarily getting over that part, but valuing the creative act more?
Oh, it's fucking horrible. Yeah, it's it's fucking horrible. It's a bit like in Kill Bill where she learns how to do fucking kung fu, innit? And she turns up and he's just like, right, I'm going to break you. So it was like 20 long years of that, of self-discovery, of learning how to write songs, of learning what suited me and what didn't, and trying to all the while trying to survive, trying to earn money. I couldn't do all of those things all at once. It was too much. So I took to drink and drugs, from the age of 19, 20 onwards, you know what I mean? They helped me, they guided me through it, so to speak, until, you know, I got to a stage where I was fortunate and I became successful, you know. So yeah, it was horrible, you know. It was just full of dead-end jobs, no luck, you know, a lot of fun. But you know what's fun? You know, fun's fuck all if you haven't got any foundation. If you haven't got any pride, or if you haven't got any self-respect, it's nothing. After a while, it just becomes empty. You know, it just becomes like every other pornographic film. You know what I mean? You've seen one, you've seen them all. You know, so it's like it was hard work.
When you found success, right? You said it was like the drugs and the fun that kind of kept you going through that, right? What was the moment where you kind of like recognized that that the work you had put in was kind of paying off? Like, how did it change you as a person?
Yeah, I just couldn't believe it. You know, me and my wife, we couldn't believe it. My wife couldn't believe it. My friends couldn't believe it. What? Yeah, I'm getting moaned at, sorry. It was unbelievable. Yeah, it was unbelievable. It was quite hard to take in. It was like a dream. It was really dreamy and surreal. Obviously I was very happy about it. You know, I was over the moon about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because I'm just like, you know, here, I'm curious, like, about this a little bit, because I've noticed moving to Los Angeles, this is a town built on delusion, and not everyone, but a lot of people that live here, their main engine is delusion, and they think, oh, I'm gonna be the one who's famous. I'm gonna become Brad Pitt, or I'm gonna become Angelina Jolie, or whatever, right? And that's the thing that sustains them. And one of the reasons why this place is so surreal, I think, is because that's so many people are living in that delusion, that it just infects the kind of like atmosphere here.
Yeah, sure.
Right. But you had a different, you at some point you were like, I'm not going to be famous. Right. So what's your engine in those times?
I was complete self-doubt. It was self-doubt, but at the same time, it was like a self-belief as well. Of when I came across the formula for Sleaford Mods, it was like, this is it. This is fucking it. I just connected with it totally. And it was like, I remember the first few demos were like, it was eureka. It was a eureka moment. I remember sitting outside the house that I was renting a room in, and one Saturday morning, and just chain smoking and drinking cans of lager and listening to the same 3 songs. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that the formula was there. It worked so well. Everything about it worked brilliantly. The lyrics, the rhythm, the whatever, all of it worked. And so it was from then on that I carried on. But at the same time, I was wrapped in this defeatism, this self-doubt, and negativity that was really overbearing, But I just carried on because I love writing songs, I got this formula and I could write songs so much easier. It wasn't so much of a struggle, I just carried on.
Yeah, I think those moments are so, like, when I had been struggling. I thought I was going to be an academic. I thought I come from like very typical Jewish parents. They wanted a professional class child, and when I moved away from that, it was this struggle of like, well, what I really want to do is write. All right, I want to make comedy, and until I finally embraced that and moved to New York to do that, everything felt bad and it felt wrong. And there was this moment when I moved to New York where everything kind of settled in me. And it feels like that's the same kind of moment you had.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I think it comes in different ways, doesn't it, with people? You just know, don't you? But yeah, I think you have to have your receptor out, your antennae, so to speak, needs to be out. And that in itself is a job in itself. And that's something you have to build on your own, isn't it? And you built it in the knowledge. You build it in the knowledge that it's gonna get hold of something sooner or later. And when it does, you know in yourself. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was really good talking to you.
Cool. Well, thanks. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.